They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardine, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Well, now the new intro is officially official.
That's amazing. I feel like a real boy. It's amazing. I'm so excited. I can't believe it. Honestly, sincerely, that is ridiculously cool to hear your son say my name like that, and it's on the show now. It's totally
it's on the show.
Flabbergasted. You surprised me with that one, man.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, welcome formally into the show, and now we've got no James this week, but this one, it's a treat for you guys because I like offering different perspectives. I like giving you guys somebody else to hear from that's not the same echo chamber. Joe's one of those people. And we were talking about before I hit record, like, hey, what do you want to talk about, Joe? And Joe's PR person suggested something, and then Joe gave us his back, and I'm like, no, forget what they said. We're talking about this. So, Joe, give us, by the way, welcome to the show. I'm super excited.
Thanks for having me.
An hour. Give me a 30-second sample of who you are and some of that background you gave us, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah, I'm, maybe not your traditional security guest. I'm a large-scale infrastructure operator. My career spans over almost 30 years. I work for Netskope today as the chief platform officer, built the platform, the global network for them. And then before that, AWS, I ran the global infrastructure for AWS for years. Before that, Limelight Networks, which is a large-scale CDN, and then several carriers like Level 3. And so I've been building cloud and carrier infrastructure for almost 20 years. And now we wake up today and find out that security and network are together, and so let's talk about that.
Voila! In the magic that is convergence or reconvergence, I feel like because network and security were the same thing for a while. Like security was just part of something networking did, and then we spun off and did our own thing for a while. I would argue that wasn't a super winning proposition. It's been a rough go. I can see why they're separate in some cases, but this is the reconvergence in certain parts is awesome. And that is a hell of a set of credentials, my friend. that's relatively impressive. Right? Okay, so that is that is a level of build out that even like the large scale enterprise people generally don't get to, because you're talking about when you build several levels probably of redundancy, fail safes, failovers, all kinds of things. Talk to me about what's different when it comes to building a network of that size, that class, than your average enterprise network.
Yeah, so there are some parallels, but it comes down to the fact that you can't count on anybody, right? So you can't outsource your internet access. You can't outsource your data centers. You can't outsource, at any level. I've been through several conversions through the time of the internet, right? I started in web hosting, and then went to long haul, right? So we had to lay a bunch of fiber, and then CDN, which was live events and overrunning pipes, and then AWS, the conversion of cloud and compute and centralized data centers, and now this network and security, whether it's a reconvergence or a migration. And so the theme at that scale of the gigawatts or the terabits or whatever, is it comes down to, at Amazon, we laid our own subsea fiber, right? We laid 1 million fiber pairs of metro fiber, because if the carriers don't have the model, there's no global carriers, there's nobody that can handle that scale. And so you have to build it yourself. And to tie it into your enterprise listener, they have historically just paid a managed service, pay AT&T or run an MPLS over the top of it, and that just doesn't work anymore. You have to you have to kind of control your destiny and understand all the different layers of the OSI, right? What's my physical layer and my transport and the protocols, DNS. And it all ties into security because, you can't backhaul anymore like you used to. People expect, whether it's AI or public cloud, they need low latency. And if you're backhauling everything to jam it through an on-prem firewall, you're going to have a bad time. And so you got to have that control. So it is, when I got to Amazon, the first thing we did was we started eliminating, enterprise type services and going wholesale, building everything ourselves. And they follow that model. They build their own chips, their own servers. It's the only way to scale.
That's incredible. I mean, when you start thinking about it at that rate, right? It's not commercial. It's not even high grade commercial stuff. It's like you're building purpose built stuff to run at.
Yeah, I had my CLEC license. I had thousands of construction crews. Like there is every level. It's the only way to keep up, especially with federal. And so, yeah, you have to control every aspect of the supply chain. If you're relying on one piece, you just can't keep up. Yeah, it's bonkers. You
mentioned, Jen, this will probably catch your interest too. Joe's talking about backhaul, right? Like, networks used to be a bunch of hub and spoke, a bunch of remote offices, all have local access, and then they connect through, back through the central office where the big firewalls were, and you go out to the internet from there. That doesn't seem practical anymore, given the fact that every place is a POP now.
Yeah. Every house.
Right. I kind of wonder what that's done. What that's done to when you sit down and think about it, what that's done to bandwidth requirements and the distribution of policy-based access and security.
Well, real quick, I remember my first exposure to a big network like Joe, like you're talking about. I was working for a company that was acquired by Lucent Technologies, and our job was to sort of integrate sort of the TCP/IP stack into what was the infrastructure stack back in the late 90s. And, we thought we knew networks, we're like, the hot kids in the room, and these guys just smoked us, right? They knew networks like nobody knew networks. And I was like, wow. So it was a real learning experience in going through that entire process. And then I remember the big conversations, we were talking about 2G and stuff like that back then. And the big conversations all about the edge. All they could talk about was the edge. How can we speed up and get fiber closer to the house, closer to the consumer? That was a big deal, now we're there, right? So Raph, that you're saying it is, look at the evolution of the physical infrastructure. Yeah. And even now they're trying to push into, LEO, low Earth orbit stuff with Starlink kind of thing like that. But the entire tapestry of what we originally understood as the WAN, right, and then the WAN always had a POP where you plugged into the internet by some provider, and that's where you dropped your firewall, and now it's completely different. Every single device is essentially a direct connect. That's what I was saying, it's like a POP, and now all of a sudden it changes the perspective of security altogether. That's the battle we're fighting every day, right?
So I'm thinking about, like, we did this, we had this model many jobs ago where we did that, right? We routed global networks through central offices, and that made policy management complicated, right? Because you had to, like, everybody had to register, like, okay, this server 2 NAT levels down is going to get to the internet, so you got to put that rule in. And I remember we complained about it. Like, man, it's gonna be so much easier when everything can get out to the internet and we can just protect everything at the edges. And it turns out I long for those old days where I complained about things.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about you can't underestimate the latency requirements, and that's the biggest reason you can't backhaul anymore, because these applications require, like you said, something like Teams or something like collective workspace like G Suite. Like you got to have a low latency. You can't backhaul. And then you talk about policy management. How do you deal with a user in China, a user in the US, and a user in the UK? It's like you have different policies. Bring your own devices. Bring your own instances. It's a wild west out there. For me, building large scale, I just need a big budget and some time. Whereas these enterprise, they're inheriting, every single one of them is inheriting someone else's mess. right? Some decision. There's always a Windows NT server somewhere in the mix, right? And then they have all of the scary, the bad guys are way ahead of them on all the scary exploits, and they got to try to manage in the middle. And so I don't envy them. And for me, I always just try to tell them when we talk, it's like, man, try to control as much of your destiny as you can, because if you're relying on third-party carriers to manage your internet and your point to point, you're gonna struggle for sure.
So
it's tough.
So you said you're not a traditional security guy, but like that's something that you have to think about. How does that factor in when you're building something at that scale? Where do you think about thinking about sort of like the network you've got out there today, again, on Netskope? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how the hell do you begin to think about security that way? Because so instinctively, I want to put it in some places where I can, like you said, control your own destiny. But it doesn't work that way anymore.
Yeah, so it comes down to a couple things. And so Jim was talking about the edge. And the problem is not the edge. The problem is the middle, right? So carriers don't make any money in the middle mile. The peering is still a mess, right? As far as who peers with who and where it goes. And again, we talk about the backhauling thing. And so the middle of these, we talk about 5G, you can get 5G to your phone, but once it gets back to the tower, it's going to choke off somewhere in somebody's fiber network. And so you have to control your destiny. And so, warning, I'm going to do my shameless plug here. At Netskope, we decided to build a overlay edge, right? So we are connected in 70 plus cities, 100 plus data centers, and we connect to all the carriers directly, so we can manage that middle mile. We call it an overlay. And so you talk about an approach from security, and the thing I like to tell people is that if you have a performance problem, you have a security problem, right? So, a security person would buy as many solutions as they can if nobody notices. But if it slows down work, right, the joke is that the network person speeds up the packets and the security person slows them down. And so if you have a performance issue, it's not a joke, I know, right? The consumer just they turn off the client, or they use their own device, or they switch to 5G, and now you have a back door, right? And so performance is the key. And so it comes down to having access to where your users are, right? If it's an edge based, having control. Again, I'm going to use that word 100 times, because if you have a single internet provider, you're going to be limited, especially if you have users in other countries. And so you got to look at it from, how do I get from point A to point B, not just how fast can I get to the internet. You could have 100 gig link at your home. It's dying in the cul-de-sac, right? And so your Starlink's great, but when it gets back down to earth, it's dying somewhere in their network. And so you have to have, unfortunately, that coverage to get end to end, right? And that's where that's the dirty little secret of the internet is, no one makes money in the middle. And you look at something like Netflix, not to bring that up, but
oh yeah,
you pay Netflix $20 a month. They don't make more money if you watch more shows, right? They have to pay for that. And your carrier doesn't make money if you watch more shows. Your home internet's $80, your Netflix is $20. But as you watch more, the middle is where all the congestion is. And so, it's something that most people don't realize, but it's the choke point of all things.
That's interesting because, let's talk about Netflix for a second, right? We all watched Mike Tyson pretend to fight whatever that dude's name was, Jake Paul, in what was arguably the most embarrassing thing in Tyson's career. I got to say, as a non-professional observer of pro sport, like I know a fixed thing when I see it. Like that was painful to watch. Yeah. But everybody complained. Speaking of attempting
I think the middle just gave up on there.
That's hilarious. And so, Jim, look at that. We're connected fine. Everything's going great. I got to wait for Joe to come back.
That's amazing.
Joe comes back.
There you go.
That's funny timing.
That's hilarious timing. Somebody's got a sense of humor out there.
It's just my ISP just bounced it like, hey, you better stop talking.
But like everybody, like all the social medias were on fire because Netflix, the king of streaming, the undisputed champion of large bandwidth, faltered, and everybody got buffering. Everybody got congestion. And the congestion, I'm guessing, wasn't on my AT&T fiber from here to the curb. It was somewhere in the squishy middle there.
That's exactly right. We call it in Netscope the gray cloud. So every vendor will just have a picture of a gray cloud in their diagram representing the internet, right? And so, I didn't look at it too much, but Netflix has plenty of servers. The problem is you have one stream that you have to replicate, and then you have the middle mile where it gets stuck, right? And so, and then there's a lot of policies about how much you buffer. It's a live event. You want to buffer 10 minutes, right? And so you could build multiple streams, and the reality is something like that is incredibly hard. But if you think about it, the parallels of your cell phone, right? So the three of us are old enough to have had a landline at one point. And you never dropped a call. If the call dropped, you called the phone company. Where now your cell phone, I had 2 calls drop today. You just reconnect. It's just different scale of infrastructure. And live events, the internet is not set up for live events. It's just there's still lots of problems, right? And so, and 100 million people is incredible. The internet's still only a couple hundred terabits, and so that's a big ass event. And unfortunately, that they're gonna wear it because they're the provider. But I assure you, most of the problem wasn't theirs. It's just they're gonna be the ones stuck with it.
That makes it super interesting, right, Jim? Because
Yes, it does.
Listen, I know some of my listeners they're gonna wonder what the hell I'm talking about. You guys know, back when I built networks, and this is a long time ago, and I was studying for my CCNA. It was internal LAN, Cisco router, T1, internet.
The magic.
The magic. And I knew where to put the security policy. It was the thing that was between the little box that was on the cable, right? Physical cable between the Cisco router. You plug that into my little box, and then my box plugged into the switching infrastructure, and off we went. And I did security policy there. I think about like the way that you said it was one stream, right? Cached and multiplied thousands and thousands of places, thousands of times to 100 million endpoints, which kind of blows my mind. I'm not a network person by trade, so my brain has a hard time processing like what does that even look like on paper? Like what the reference architecture for that? What does that actually look like? And I imagine that's pretty hairy.
Oh yeah. The reality is the currency of a content provider is connections, right? It's not bandwidth. You typically can get enough bandwidth. It's can you have enough, pump to your pipe, right? Can you have enough connections, and can you hold them open, and can you have the throughput be high enough resolution? And so that's where it comes down. Netflix is, I'm pretty sure from memory, the largest traffic generator on the internet. Maybe YouTube gives them a run for the money, but you're caching content, right? And so you can cache a cat video thousands and thousands of places and be fine. That you have to replicate. So you take your feed from wherever it was, Vegas, and then the satellites, you spread it out, and then you're trying to give everybody a live experience. And so maybe a couple minutes between feeds, and you replicate them, and then you amplify them, and then you throw bandwidth on top of that as you get closer to your cul-de-sac. It's a hell of a problem. And so I assure you, there'll be no like the NFL stuff is another great example. Dallas plays the Seahawks. You're going to have 30 million people in those two cities trying to watch that. That infrastructure can't handle that. So I think we're on a super tangent, but I guess the gist for your security enterprise listener is, the internet's a scary place, and I would not turn a blind eye on it for your traffic or your users, because it's got a long way to go.
Well, I'm thinking of all the layers of security, right? So we're talking about taking media, content, data, and spreading it around across these massive networks that are so massive that they end up being multiplexed out to single little threads like capillaries, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And then we're saying, okay, how do I make it where somebody has to pay for that? So I'm not going to steal it from an endpoint. I'm not going to steal it from the cul-de-sac router. I'm not going to steal it from the caching system, or I'm not in the satellite, or I'm not in whatever distribution mechanism. So every time that thing lops off and creates babies, you know what I mean? Every time the box splits and goes out to 10 boxes, and the 10 boxes become 100.
Yeah. Well, the reality is you hit the nail on the head as far as paying for it, right? So if you think about innovation of throughput, the cell phones are continuing 5G, 4G, but you pay a meter on your cell phone. So everybody that delivers cell service makes money the more you use. Your home internet and even your enterprise network connections are fairly flat fixed fees. And so the more you use it, it costs people money. And so I'll say it again, there's no money in the middle. And that's where there's always limitations of capability from that. And the cloud providers are very happy to build centralized compute, right? You don't see them building hundreds of AZs. They build their few because they want you to continue to use the services in a centralized place. If a cloud provider had 100 locations, you could use your own data center or you could use other providers. And so there's a little bit of a business justification to keep things concentrated. There's a middle mile internet issue, and then the enterprise is stuck trying to figure out how to thread the needle. And because there are no global carriers or the providers don't make money, you're going to have to figure it out as the enterprise operator. And then you tie in the security piece now, which is because there's so many different ways of transport, you got to secure them all. And that's, it's a tough job.
That's all. Yeah. I'm thinking, I mean, you're kind of staring into space here. I'm thinking off about if I'm the security resource, the security engineer on this, the architect, right, Jim? We're trying to figure out where do we then, as this infrastructure grows, and you're right. I mean, the more you talk about this, the less the internet is definitely not built for live content. Everything's not. Most of what we know isn't built for live content, right?
And
live content wants to be a one-to-one.
Your Zoom calls, your team, your database replication, now your AI, like latency sensitive, voice over IP. It's more and more applications. So, we talk about Netflix as volume, but if you're a real estate firm or a bank, or the banks have been building their own data centers for years because they can't count on that. And so, Joe enterprise engineer is going to have to figure it out. And again, shameless plug, the Netskope infrastructure was designed to help with that. We have the overlay, we have the peering, the connectivity to help with that transport. Most of our customers see an improvement on their performance over general internet. We make over 235 routing changes every month, fiber cuts and congestion points. And so the Netskope infrastructure that we built with, the background of the team, understanding the limitations, is a unique approach. And we got a little bit of an advantage because we came later, right? So there's some innovation by our competitors, but they're established in their foundations. And for us, we got to use SDN, we got to use Kubernetes, we got to use, container services that didn't exist, which allow us to scale and grow and provide a service. And so that's where this all converges, is back to that latency and performance and control.
How do you explain, a slight detour here briefly, but how do you explain when you talk to service providers for business internet, and all that kind of stuff, the guys in the middle, basically, when they say, oh, we're going to provide you this type of business service, and it starts off like, the old days, like email, whatever, and they kind of like just pack on security, right? So I mean, and your honest opinion, are they doing secure things, or are they just doing like DNS filtering and,
So there's two I guess there's two perspectives from security, from a carrier, provider, MSP, and the reality is there's going to be attacks that are service disruption, right? A DDoS or DNS hijacking, known bad actors, known bad sites, whitelist, blacklist. Those they do very well, right? But if it's phishing, if it's data loss, if it's exploits in your infrastructure, they just don't have the mechanisms to handle that. And so security is a lot of things, right? Somebody throwing a rock at my house is very different than somebody picking the lock, right? It's like, or, throwing a rock, right? And so an ISP, a carrier, is going to provide you a general protection away from known things. But unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of security issues are internal, user mistakes, phishing, backdoors, things like that. And you need policy, you need inspection, you need your data inspected. And that's where services like Netskope and others are very important, because if you can't see it, you can't stop it, right?
Can I take a slightly different path for a second? Because Jim, your thought triggered something in my head. As we are talking about the ability, like the not to quote a Spaceballs, but ludicrous speed in bandwidth, because I started at 300 baud. I got 100 gig fiber to my house.
Yeah.
These are speeds, you know, 17-year-old me could not have fathomed. Like, this is not something that I could think about. And you're right. You said earlier, network wants to speed things up. Security tends to slow things down. So we can look at them, right? We can figure out what is this thing that's flying. The faster it goes by, the harder it is to look at, inspect meaningfully. And if you're doing anything but basic pattern-based detection on single or, you know, a strand of packets, that's one thing. But when you're talking about attacks that are spread out over minutes, hours, days, right? On 100 gig connection, you're talking about I can't even, like, I can't do the math in my head, but say it's 100 gig connection, 70% saturation plus or minus for 24 hours. That's a lot of, like, the compute power to analyze that is insane. And there's no part of me that believes that we're not going to do that without slowing something down, unless you're doing things out of band, right? Like, out of band is one thing, but then you don't get to do the immediate, like, stop it as it's happening.
Yeah.
So
I think the, you know, not to disagree with you, but I think you'd be surprised how much you could process, right? Our data centers can do over 2 terabits a second. And so your 100 megs or whatever is nothing. We do everything in RAM. We do everything in containers, in the sense that it's, you know, and we hairpin everything. And so what kills you in processing is latency, right? So when I was at Amazon, we had a very large coffee chain that wanted to do facial recognition in their stores, right? So when you walked in, they could say, oh, you know, you get your flat white and here's your gift card and, you know, thanks for whatever. But yeah. The problem is the latency from the time it takes me to get from the door to the counter is too fast for them to get all the way back to the cloud, look up my ugly face on the whatever storage and bring it back. And so that's where you have to be close to the edge, close to these networks to be able to do hairpin and processing in real time. And so the issue is not, the technology exists to stay in line and to process in real time. The problem is if you don't have enough locations, you know, that's where the delay comes, right? Again, it goes back to that backhaul, right? If you're a New York City based company and you're backhauling the West Coast to New York, you can have 1 million processors. You're stuck. Physics, you can't beat physics, right? And
okay,
so that's really
point.
where, yeah. And you'd be surprised how fast the servers, the compute, you know, putting things in RAM, you know, SSD. And you know, GPUs, they keep up with the processing. You know, Netflix didn't have processing issues; they had throughput issues, and that's where, from an enterprise perspective.
But I think, you know, I had a similar conversation recently, and it was, to me, is like there's processing power, but then there's the use of that power. And I think sometimes, you know, when you're looking for security problems, you're like trying to find a needle in the haystack. You're looking for an anomaly. You're looking for, is this actually normal? Is it not? Right. So I think it's, as opposed to being a couple cycles, I sense that sometimes because of the threat dynamics are so dynamic that you got to like plug all these things together and build almost a picture, and then you go, okay, that picture's fine, and then move on to the next one.
And that's how it works. That's how it works. We have hundreds of millions of users, thousands of customers. We get feeds from all different, you know, government agencies, security, and our efficacy is the key, right? So I can get it there fast. Can you look at it? And then are you looking at the right thing? If you've been through the airport, if the TSA doesn't have metal detectors, what's the point of stopping me, right? And so if you don't have the efficacy, that's one thing that drew me to Netskope was I can build big networks anywhere, but the product inspection and the efficacy is significant. So you have to be careful of the latency. You have to understand your direct to internet, and then you hit the nail on the head. You have to have policy that can be enforced. And so the level of inspection is not necessarily a challenge. It's, can you decrypt SSL? Can you inspect traffic? You know, we break down hundreds of different applications to be able to understand what you're looking for. And so you talk about AI, if your employers are using it and they're uploading sensitive data, you got to catch that in real time. You can't catch it later and go, yeah, Susie in accounting put everybody's salary on the internet, but we got it later. Like that's done, right? It's already the problem. And so there's a lot of aspects to it, but you know, being able to catch it, have the policy, and have it very little impact on the user is a science.
That makes that game a lot more interesting, because you're trying to minimize the impact that inspection causes. And your point about having multiple minimizing the distance, because you can't beat physics, that's true. Although now that we're using light, right, and speed of light's faster, so you got faster throughput and presumably higher. The road is wider, but the speed limit's also higher.
Right.
But there's a theoretical limit to that, fiber it's fine. Is there faster than the speed of light? Can we do faster than the speed of light internet?
No, the reality is, a single fiber pair can handle the entire internet today. And so you're not going to run out of physical in our lifetime. You're not going to run out of physical limitations. It's the transponders, it's the compute, it's the ports, right? The connections that's where your limits are, right? A plane can fly 1,000 miles an hour. The human body can't withstand the G-force, right? And so the technology can always propel things fast enough. It's just whether or not the limitation of the components in the middle can handle it. Right?
Can I ask the $64,000 question?
Yeah,
sure.
Why aren't we putting security in all these network touch points? Why isn't there sort of a movement? Because that's where the bad guys put stuff. There's all kinds of technology equipment we're not allowed to consume as Americans, or the federal government as an example, right? Is there a working group that exists to synthesize and bring some commonality into these network infrastructure pieces? Because listen, it seems like everything's touching those points, and the network is where things happen. If you're going to peer into something, peer into the network.
Yeah, the crazy part is in my old world and wholesale, and there's a ton of conferences. There's IETF and there's ITW and there's all the NOGs, but in the enterprise space, there's nothing. The vendors have taken over, right? Cisco, Amazon, Google, they run their own vendor events, but I'm shocked. There are no network enterprise working groups. And so I know your point was a little more specific than that, but the reality is it's not even a forum to say, hey, look, this is the best net, because we're all fighting against the same bad behavior, right? So it's not an agriculture company and a bank don't have different bad guys. It's the same bad guys using the same tools, but the attack surface and the attackees are not talking to each other on ways of improving. That's the one thing that blows me away, is that I talk to, we have hundreds of customers, and they're all kind of feeling around individually, and there is no centralized place to share that. And so just to your point is, if there was a collective to say, hey, we're going to unify a defense path against that and close off the exits, because all they got to do is get in one, and then it kind of screws everybody else. Look at how that works. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that inspired the thought there.
Can I? I want to ask another one that's I feel like is the white elephant in a lot of these rooms, because we talk about the thing that's hurting us, or maybe setting security at a disadvantage, and that is encryption, right? Is encrypting and decrypting these things, is it causing any significant processing utilization, an increase in processor utilization, bandwidth utilization? Is there any significant downside besides the fact that we're suddenly blind to encrypting everything?
Yeah, the reality is that whether it's link encryption or like a SSL type encryption or application, if your security vendor is not able to open it and look at it, it is a huge vulnerability. And so, shameless plug, Netskope does break the encryption and will do the packet level and content level inspection, and a lot of vendors don't. But it is a tough decision for the enterprise, right? If I don't encrypt it so my security vendor can look at it, I have a bunch of vulnerabilities. And if I do encrypt it, I need to make sure I have a vendor that can look at it. But then I have other challenges, bandwidth consumption and resources required to manage and keep the keys and the encryption going. But, my opinion as a purist is you encrypt every chance you get, right? You encrypt the link and the session, and that's going to protect you from some pretty bad things. And then you go after you limit your user capabilities, right? And, you go from there. But it's unfortunately, I think encryption is not going away, and it needs to be embraced.
I want to ask a fun question, because this is one that I've talked about with probably dozens of people over the years, and it's like some of the most vulnerable ways that internet is most vulnerable. DNS and BGP, it seems like.
Yeah.
Why the hell are these things? I feel like this is like Frankenstein's monster. We just kind of it's like on the table, it's dead. We just shock it back to life. Like, all right, we got a couple more years out of this thing. At what point do we fix these things, because they're so easily misused, abused, broken, redirected, etc.?
Yeah,
BGP
it was
DNS particularly.
Yeah, BGP is fantastic because when I was at Amazon, so like the reality is that if you don't have your filters set up right, anybody can just announce the internet and bring down a bunch of people, right? That
happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, every 6 to 12 months, somebody's bringing down a portion of the net because the policy, like I could just go online and just start announcing anybody's routes. And if you're not set up right, then people are going to believe that I'm you. And so when I got to Amazon, I was excited because I'm like, oh, I'm going to push it, right? I'm a large buyer, I'm a large content, whatever. And we're going to create a standard and a requirement. If you want to connect to us, you have to have, BGP auth and whatever. And again, I got nowhere. Like it was like we would get the networks and they would be like some big networks. They wouldn't even know, they wouldn't have the version of routing operating system to be able to support the features. And so it comes down to the longer and older we get, things like IPv6, right? I was on a call yesterday where people are like just giving up. Like it's just, we don't think that'll ever happen. So IPv6, DNS, again, that's usually the easiest exploit and from a loss of service. And then BGP, and those three areas are, unless somebody big enough cares, you're always going to have an issue, because the problem is if three of us ran an ISP in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and we didn't upgrade the policy, then we would be isolated from the entire internet. And I don't know that anybody wants to make that decision to say, okay, well, Joe Raphael, Jim Net in New Mexico now no longer gets to play with BGP. And so it's always the lowest common denominator. And with DNS and IPv6 and BGP, it's tough. You need complete consensus of every AS to do those. And it's just, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Not in my lifetime.
That's the weird part, right? Like, we've known the problem. We lament it when it fails. And then it's like, okay, well, let's go do something about it. People like, and you just hear the, ooh, boy, look at the time. I left my iron on. I got an email to reply to.
Hey, let me know how that goes.
Every time. And it's funny because we can have hyperscaled infrastructure, network infrastructure that can stream up to 100 million people in potentially 4K, and like one badly announced BGP route and the entire thing's gone.
See ya.
The entire thing, exactly. Yeah. I think it's still the Wild West out there. Yeah.
Humans, I think, are just terrified of scale. I mean, the point you made about DNS is an example, right? I mean, this thing's been around since like 3 days after the birth of the internet, kind of thing. And we haven't touched it. I mean, I have lost count the number of times I've had to update bind in my career. Right? Think about it. It's just this constant process of fixing it. And now the fundamentals of the protocol, now we're just band-aiding all these things around it as an example. And it's just like, if we all just got in a room, it'd be a pretty simple thing.
It requires consensus, and we're not in the day and age where people want to, contribute to, to the collective. So it's, maybe a bigger problem.
Two little things, BGP and DNS. Raph, you're brilliant for bringing up those two, because those really are sort of the backbone.
Don't forget IP addresses. I'm telling you, I don't want to be.
When you said IPv6 is dead, I was like, oh,
I don't want to be Chicken Little, but we're out of IP addresses.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been out of IP addresses for 20 years, Joe.
Yeah, it's so crazy.
I know.
So crazy.
Like I'm literally like, I'm not even, I've been hearing, this is like you can go back to, and this is going to anger people and I don't care. You can go like, recently I've seen the like early 80s video where it shows an iceberg chunk breaking off and somebody says, if we don't take drastic measures by the mid 90s, all of our coasts will be under 20 feet of water. And you're like, wow, that was misjudged. And then
are you saying that IPv6 is like global warming, internet global warming?
Well, all I'm saying is in 1978,
You just got canceled.
Right. It was right. Yeah. There's a bunch of people hitting unsubscribe right now, but there's another video that went around. It was, I think, produced by the U.S. EPA that said, the various different Arctic waterways were freezing over, and they're like, we're not quite sure what to do. This could be a global freeze, and like 10 years later, we're all going to be drowning, and like 40 years later. Right. We're not yet, but we all know we need to fix the problem. We're just like, tomorrow, if we don't do something tomorrow, we're all going to be dead. And tomorrow comes, and people just sort of go, "Well, I'm not going to listen to you anymore because we didn't like." I don't know. Maybe were we like that with IPv4, where in the early 2000s, so we're on it, we've got to go to IPv6 or else, and we kind of natted our way through this.
Yeah.
Natted our way. It's exactly.
We did. We like
100%.
natting was the genius invention that. Like, it makes things more complicated, but it turns out you can, infinitely multiply how many things you can have on the internet because of that.
Anyway, that's a hell of a tangent.
Right? But like DNSSEC, Dan Kaminsky, God rest him, was like, if we don't do DNSSEC, everything's, we found how bad DNS is, it can be taken over. DNSSEC is the answer. Everybody went, yep, DNS is the answer, like in Fraggle Rock, And then like 20 years goes by and we're like, hey, anybody know what happened to that good idea we had? And people are like, oh yeah, that good idea. That's coming in the next I gotta go. Nobody wants to do it because it's like it like what you were saying, Joe. It's all or nothing. So you got to like replace everything, and you got to get everybody on the internet to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody got
a server or a router somewhere they don't know the password to.
We all have that. I feel like and the further we get past the life cycle of these things, the harder it is to now fix them, which means, and to bring it back to a shameless plug for what you guys do, like that's so much more important.
Yeah.
Because your infrastructure, there's like this moment where it's old enough that it needs to be replaced, but it's not so old that we don't know how to, like without breaking everything. And so like at that point, the further you get away from that into the future, which is where we are with DNS and BGP and something, and like Telnet's still out there, for God's sake, IPv4, right? And we're far off past those dates, those expiration dates, we're far past.
Yeah.
And people are like, wow, that router's still doing, some archaic version of BGP. Like, we should update that. Like, yeah, I don't know what happens if I do that.
Yeah, don't touch
it. Well, it's not broken, so let's not touch it.
Spider webs on it.
Right?
Yeah. That thing is, you rebooted, it's not coming back. So, and that's we were kind of all over, which is fun, but the enterprise, they have to prioritize, right? And so it let the wholesale and the large scale providers fight DNS and BGP, but to bring it back to the enterprise networker, it's be able to see your packets, where your packets are. That's the key. And then do your best to inspect it and then try to control your destiny. There is one thing that I wanted to clarify on here was about 5 or 6 years ago, in order to maybe even run your own fiber or get a point-to-point link, a 10 gig link between cities could cost $100,000 a month, and now it's a few $1,000s. So a lot of the enterprise networker doesn't realize that they can actually run a typical wholesale type infrastructure, run maybe their own fiber or point-to-points, and strip out some of that overlay. So there wasn't any place to interject it, but I did want to maybe that was an unknown thing, but it's becoming more and more cost manageable for you to run your own type of network.
How crazy is that? We're going back. I remember ripping out X25 for frame, ripping out frame for ATM, ripping out ATM for MPLS kind of thing, and then it became all synthesized. You went into the cloud, and you're literally talking about RAF, where you started it.
Yeah.
Right. Where you started it, hub and spoke, right? It's where you literally started.
Yeah. Well, when he started, it was $1,000 a megabit a second. Now it's 10 cents, it's crazy. So it's good stuff, man. This has been a lot of fun.
Joe, thanks so much. This is interesting. I was hoping that we'd get to a point where we'd be like, let's be hopeful because things are getting better. I think things are getting faster.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're getting better for security. It's like Jeremiah Grossman said one time, it's like, somebody asked him if AppSec is getting better. And he said, yes, we are advancing the state of the art in security. However, the state of the problem is getting bigger faster. Yeah. So it looks like we're moving backwards when we're doing a good job. It's just the problem keeps getting bigger.
That's it.
In this case is just the bandwidth and the volume and the endpoints, and everything is on the internet now. It's crazy. Man, you guys, that's such a cool background. Thank you for sharing that with us. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it, guys. That was a good trip.
That was awesome. Jim, thank you, sir. And all right, folks, that was a good one. I hope you enjoyed it. Go find your old 300 baud US Haze. Remember, you can dial 1-800 US Haze to go test your modem. I that big commission not too long ago. And awesome. All right, guys, thanks for listening. This has been another exciting Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast from the industry's longest continuously running cybersecurity podcast with the perspectives that you need to hear. And Joe DePalo has been my guest from Netskope. Go check them out. That is a hell of a story, Joe. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you another time, another place.